Sacrifice Explained. Chapter 1. If you don't mind, I would like to start with Plato. In Book 10 of the Republic, I believe he talked about the three kinds of beings and the things they birth. This introduction might be weird for modern listeners, but I think it's a helpful introduction to imitation, or more appropriately, mimesis, and the manner in which it will be discussed in this essay. According to Plato, it talks about God who makes the forms of all things being at the top of the echelon. Second, he talks about a craftsman who makes the things from the raw materials. And thirdly, he talks about an artist who makes the simulacrum of the things that were made by the craftsman. Plato believes that while artists engage in imitation, that is, by copying the things the craftsman makes, even the craftsman is not left out of this exercise, because the craftsman imitates the forms of things. For modern listeners, this might read something like the ideas or the blueprint of a thing. As such, we can summarize and say that the craftsman works on a copy, while the artist is not working on a copy, but the copy of a copy. This distinction is essential for Plato, and yet it goes further to pass a normative judgment on the elements in this model. The form, again, it reads ideas blueprint, is the authentic thing. The things that were made by the craftsman are pretty cool, but the simulacrum of the latter is subpar. Hence, Plato's negative attitudes towards poets, artists, and the like. One could say without any remorse that such normative judgment is reckless. But that is not my main point here. It is the fact that Plato's mimetic theory does not distinguish between acquisitive mimesis and non-acquisitive mimesis. My listeners should recall that acquisitive mimesis leads to conflict, while non-acquisitive mimesis involves the imitation desiring of a limitless resource, say acquisition of language of laughter. Again, acquisitive mimesis leads to conflict because the object of interest, for example, money, land, power, is always of limited amount. Why irrational? Plato's animosity towards art mimesis is somewhat intelligible. Some mimesis causes violence. He couldn't situate what mimesis or what conditions must be satisfied for mimesis to lead to violence. And Plato is not alone in this. The incomprehensibility of the distinctions of mimesis also explains many bizarre behavior and attitudes from people who lived in pre-modern society, such as the killing of twins and the fear of mirrors. In Nigeria, for example, Mary Slessor, a Scottish missionary, was well regarded for her efforts that contributed to the cessation of killing of twins among Efik people in the late 19th century. Chapter 2. Establishing that we are compulsively mimetic. In primitive society, conflicts that result from acquisitive mimesis will have to be resolved one way or the other. In the absence of a resolution, according to Rene Girard's mimetic theory, humans wouldn't have survived. While the object is usually the original source of conflict in this framework, soon, mimetic rivalry takes over. That is the desire to possess something that another person also desires. The goal now changes from acquiring the object per se to defeating the model. The model is the person being imitated. In other words, the model now becomes the obstacle. When a society is embroiled in a bunch of mimetic rivalries, what results is the transfer of violence to an innocent victim called a scapegoat. The scapegoat is killed or sent off to an exile or arbitrarily punished. This so-called scapegoating mechanism can return order to the chaotic, violent community via a psychological mechanism. This experience, the primitives see as the hand of a supernatural being. In essence, you have a scapegoat, an arbitrary victim, becoming a divine being overnight. They say to themselves, this works. This has to be the hand of God. Hence, what we have here is an anthropological theory for the origin of religion and culture, with the latter coming from the repetitions of rituals. Explaining once and for all the vast range of ritualistic sacrifices that is present in virtually all primitive societies. In summary, according to this theory, the irrational fears of our ancestors towards mimesis can be attributed to the potential for violence that often arose as a consequence of imitation. Sacrifice, including human sacrifice, turned out to be one of the ways of reducing this cycle of violence, and it tends to work because they believed it worked. Another mechanism of taming violence is prohibitions and taboos. We see prohibitions a lot in primitive societies, some of which can be arbitrary. But the whole idea to them is if we can prohibit certain behaviors, it will reduce the cycle of violence because there will be less imitation and lesser mimetic rivalry. And the reader must make no mistake, this underlying principle remains applicable even in contemporary society, as evidenced by our hierarchical organization states and nations. The complete elimination of all forms of hierarchy will undeniably invite conflict stemming from mimesis. Broadly speaking, the rigid caste system in traditional societies is a marker of such prohibition. Primitives knew there was a link between mimesis and violence, but again, they just couldn't situate the mechanism. As Rene Girard puts it, to understand human culture, it is necessary to consider that only the damning of mimetic forces by means of prohibition and the diversion of these forces in the direction of ritual are capable of spreading and perpetuating the reconciliatory effect of the surrogate victim. Archaic religion is nothing other than this immense effort to keep the peace. And societies that do not have these religious motifs in place will perish from the scorching heat of violence. Archaic religion, based on myth, while barbaric, in this Girardian reading, is surprisingly pragmatic. This submission itself might sound shocking. It is shocking. We often overlook how much civilizations have shaped our opinions of things, and why terrible things have been done in the past by early humans. Many of us wouldn't have feared better because we wouldn't know better. And the lonely bright fellow who thinks different will have been more often than not amongst the first folk to be sacrificed during the chaotic times.